Take an angle, Neil. Yep. I think you're right. Back at the minus V strut now. Aerial pair we're taking to the bed will take very little force of impact that we actually had.
Columbia, Columbia, this is Houston.
I noticed that...
Columbia, this is Houston. Go ahead, bud.
Okay. Try to get some close-up pictures of that rock. I was saying that Houston stop and take a photograph of something and then want to start moving again sideways. Quite a tendency to start doing it with just gradual sideways hops until you start getting momentum.
Roger.
Can you see us underneath the LEM over at the SEQ Bay, Houston?
Yes, indeed, Buzz. We can see your feet sticking out underneath the structure of the LEM descent stage.
Okay, I'm just on the other side of the...
and now we can see you through the structure of the minus Z secondary strut.
The SEQ Bay contains the scientific experiments to be left on the surface of the moon. The laser reflector.
They're open, and it looks like they're going to stay up without any problem.
Columbia, Columbia, this is Houston. We're about to lose you on the Omnis. Request high gain antenna. React mode. Pitch 20. Yaw 135. Over.
I'm going to pick an area, Neil.
Make that yaw 175, Columbia, yaw 175 on the high gain.
Columbia's locked up on the high gain, Houston.
Roger out.
Surgeon says everything looks fine. An hour and a half of lunar surface time for Neil Armstrong.
if seismometer has been deployed manually.
Roger.
They've been on the portable life support systems for 2 hours now.
And the manual deployment of the LR cubed little spring that's at the end of the string pulled off.
We're up to ESEP deployment.
Taking the cover off the lanyard was very easy. It pulled away. Didn't seem to have any thermal effects or any blast effects on it. Underneath the ESEP, the radar looked like it came through without any heat damage that I could tell. The lanyard underneath the thermal cover was in great shape. Didn't see any evidence of thermal effects. When it pulled out, the doors went up even easier than the trainer. They didn't seem to, as the top door folded back, it didn't seem to fall into a detent, and I tugged on it a couple of times, and it looked like it was going to stay up there without any tendency to come back down again. In an effort to save some time, I elected to manually deploy both packages and pulled out the seismometer a few inches, disengaged the hook, and then disconnected it from the top and slid it out. I was unable to toss the lanyard over the side door to keep it out of the way, so it did come down from the boom and had some small tendency to get in the way. The package itself was quite easy to manage. I had my left hand on the handle and moved the right one around to support the weight as it slid off the rails. It was disengaged quite easily from the boom at the pit pin. I had it down on the surface, and then to get ample maneuvering room to get the retro reflector down, I decided that I wanted to move the seismometer away, but there happened to be a little small crater right there, so I had to move it, say, maybe 10 feet away and then come back. Remember, there didn't seem to be a reasonably good place to set the seismometer down other than right in front. It appeared to be in my way a little bit. In pulling out the laser package, I used the same technique of pulling it out a few inches, then disconnecting the lanyard from the package itself, and then pulling the string that was attached to the pit pin, and in training sessions I had pulled this one rather slowly yet firmly and had a few problems with the pit pin binding, and it appears as though the recommendation was to give it a fairly good jerk. When I did this, the wire ring that attached the cord itself to the pit pin sprung open, And either it wasn't a complete circle and hadn't been welded together, or thermal effects somehow had gotten to it and weakened its properties, but it opened up and came loose from the pin. I was able to get the pin out by depressing the one side and then pushing it with my right hand, pushing it through, and it came loose. And then I lowered it down to the surface, and again it was quite easy to handle. The boom slid back in with no problem. I left the lanyards dangling out the bottom, then pulled the retract lanyard, and the doors came back down and fitted together very nicely. The whole operation was quite smooth, and I thought we got a little bit ahead in the time in the deployment of these. Picked up the two packages, and we headed out the -Y strut, looking for a relatively level area. And I might say that in looking for level areas, I found a little bit of difficulty in looking down at the surface and saying exactly what was level. I don't know what to attribute this to particularly. You don't have as good a horizon definition. Not definition. On the Earth, when you look out to the side, you've got a very flat area. On the Moon, when you look out to the edges, you've got varying slopes. I think it's further compounded by the fact that with 1G and a center of mass considerably displaced aft and up from where it normally is, your physical cues of supporting your weight are different. The net result was that it was just a little bit difficult to tell what was level and what was sloping either to one side or up or down.
You don't have a stronger gravity indication either. So.
Yeah. It doesn't have a firm orientation. Yeah. So that pretty well covers the deployment out to the site. In going through the numbers of pulling the little lanyards, everything came off neat as can be. The handle deployed upward, rotated around, and even though I wasn't able to see it fit into its slot, this is the maneuvering handle on the PSE, which I might point out was a good bit different in configuration. The flight one was a different configuration in the training package, and we recognized this, the difference being that you couldn't see when the handle was out and locked in its detent as well on the flight package as you could on the training one. But anyway, this worked out quite well. As well, let's see. I guess I'll get into the actual deployment of the panels in just a minute, and talk first about the leveling problems. Orienting the package in azimuth was quite easy. The shadow of the gnomon stood out quite well. In our session in the lab with the flight packages, we had some concern as to just how well this shadow was going to stand out against the silvery surface. But all three of the pins that stood up on the gnomon were quite clear. I won't say they were a very crisp shadow. There was a little bit of fuzziness to them, but it was quite easy to determine where the center of it was and get it oriented at the 45-degree mark. The big problem arose in trying to get the BB to settle down into the center of its little cup. It seemed to want to find a home away from me at about 11 o'clock as I faced the package, and I would try and push it down to get it to rotate around, and it would move away from this position and then start spinning around the outside. And try as I would to gradually move it away or push down on the package away from where the bubble was to get it to drift across, all during this time I was completely unsuccessful in getting the BB to find a home anywhere but along the perimeter. And as I would bend down and look at this thing, it just appeared, from what I could see, that this cup, instead of being concave, had somehow changed its shape and was convex, and it just didn't appear as though there's any hope of that thing ever being anywhere but along the edge. So I visually tried to level it as best I could. As I indicated before, that wasn't too easy to do with a high degree of confidence. So then I went to deploy the panels. And as I recall, as I faced the package, one of the two retaining structures that should have fallen away when you pull when you upright the package, these both should fall down, exposing the panels to their deployment. This one failed to fall away, so I walked around the package, and it was quite easy to reach down with my finger and flick it loose. It didn't require much of a force at all. When I did deploy the panels, as I recall, the left one came out and deployed completely, and then following another pull on the lanyard, the right one deployed. And there was a certain amount of rocking motion as and dancing around on the surface as these two panels with their masses would flick and fling themselves around and finally settle down. And during the process of doing this, I believe two of the four corners did come in contact with the surface and picked up a light coating of surface material. I'd say the triangle that was coated might have been 2 inches on one side, maybe 1 inch on the other. A very small triangle. So I don't think there was much degradation at all of the surfaces by that particular coating. So then I made one final inspection, and when I left it, the BB was still sitting on the edge, and Neil came by with the camera to photograph it, and he looked at it, and lo and behold, the BB was sitting right in the center. No explanation for that at all.
It would have been nice to have a big rock table or something to set those packages on, but there wasn't any, and the area where they were placed was a ridge between some shallow craters. I think we have reasonably good pictures of those ridges, and they had the same kind of soil consistency as the surrounding area, and the packages were in essentially soft material and allowed us to jiggle them down and get them reasonably well set into the sand there. But there's no knowing whether they'll stay there for a long period of time or might slowly settle. There's no way
I
to
think
know.
that retain their present position pretty well. As a matter of fact, when I did decide that I wanted to change the slope of the package one way or another to move this, I found that I had difficulty in getting it to sink down a little bit more on one side. I couldn't seem to by scraping it back and forth, get it to lower one edge as much as I would like to have.
There was no difficulty in the laser reflector installation. It worked as we expected. Let's see, I went the furthest. While Buzz was returning from the ESIP, I went back to a big crater behind us. There's a crater that I'd estimate 70 or 80 feet in diameter and 15 or 20 feet deep that I went back to take some pictures of, and that was between 200 and 300 feet from the limb. And I ran back there and ran back because I didn't want to spend a lot of time doing that, but there was no trouble to make that kind of a trek, a couple hundred feet or so. It just took a few minutes to kind of lope back there, catch those pictures, and then come back.
I don't think there is such a thing as running. It's
a lope.
A lope is, and it's very hard to just walk. You break into this lope quite soon as you begin to speed up.
What a lope means, as best I can describe it, is that both feet are off the ground at the same time.
Yeah.
As opposed to walking where you have one foot on the ground at all times. This one, you essentially leave the ground with both feet and come down with the other feet in a normal running fashion, but
I guess
it's not like an earth run here because you're really just taking advantage of the low ground.
The difference there is that in a run you think in terms of moving your feet rapidly to move fast, and you can't move your feet any more rapidly than the next time you come in contact with a surface. In general, you have to wait for that to occur.
And you're waiting to come down. That's right. So the foot motion is actually fairly slow, but they are both off the ground simultaneously. And you can cover ground pretty well that way. I think it was fairly comfortable. But at the end of this trip, going out there and back, I was already feeling like I wanted to stop and rest a little bit. So that was, let's say, of the order of 500 feet of this loping with a 1 minute stop out there in the middle to take pictures. And I was ready to stop a little bit and slow down. There were a lot of interesting areas to go and look at had we had the time within, say, 500 feet or so, that it would have been interesting to be able to take that time and go out and inspect them close and get some pictures, but that was luxury that we didn't.
And there's so many of them. It's the sort of thing you just can't anticipate before flight. You can plan to some degree when you're on the surface, but until you get out and look around, you can't make your final decision as to what you're really going to do, because you're only looking at maybe 60% of the available panorama. Well, how about the documented sample? Guess there are a couple of, we're obviously running out of time at the end of the ESIP deployment. We had limited time to conduct the documented sample. The figure of 10 minutes was used, and I thought, well, we might actually progress in a formal excursion and get something started anyway. But as the box was opened up, we got the report they wanted 2 cork tubes, and it looked like that was probably going to take most of the time. So while I proceeded to do that, because that's essentially a one-man operation, Neil went around one side, the back side of the limb, and picked up what rocks he could identify, getting as wide a variety as possible. On the cork tubes, In unpacking the box, I was quite careful to try and identify where the caps were, because in some simulations we'd misplaced those or they'd dropped to the surface. And I do think we may need some better way of identifying the various packages that have this packing material wrapped around them, so that at a glance you know what's inside a certain roll. In many cases there's nothing in it and it's just been rolled up for packing. In other cases it's got an environmental container in it, or it's got the caps to the core tubes. In putting the extension handle on the core tube, the first one went on fairly cleanly and locked into position with a fairly high degree of confidence that it was not going to come out. I won't say there was complete certainty that they were not going to come apart. I then picked up the hammer and went out in the vicinity of where the solar wind was and drove the first core tube into the ground, and I pushed it in about 3 or 4 inches, and then started tapping it with the hammer, and found that that wasn't doing much at all in the way of making it penetrate further. So I started beating on it harder and harder, and I managed to get maybe 2 inches more, and I found that when I would hit it as hard as I could and then try and let the hand that was studying it release it, that it appeared as though it was just going to fall over. It didn't stay where it had been pounded in, which made it even harder, because you couldn't just back off and really let it have it. I don't know as we have any way of measuring the exact force or impact that was applied, other than subjective, or maybe from television watching the distance covered, or the measuring some velocity. But there's no doubt that I was hammering it in about as hard as I felt I could safely do. Unfortunately, we don't have any of the surfaces on the extension back to look at the impact, but I was hitting it with the hammer to the point where I was putting significant dents in the top of it. In retracting the core tube, I didn't find any resistance at all. It came up quite easily, and on rotating it up to the inverted position to keep anything from coming out, I didn't find any tendency at all for the material to come out of the core tube. When I unscrewed the cutter, the surface seemed to separate again without any tendency for the material to flow or move, which meant to me that the consistency of this material, even though it looked to be about the same, was a good bit different. In other words, if I just had some very close surface material and shifted it a little, it would tend to move from one side to the other. Whereas at the bottom of the core tube, I had the distinct impression, and it's just a descriptive phrase, that this was moist material, and that it was adhering or had this cohesive property that wet sand would. And there was no, once it was separated from the cutter, there was no tendency at all for it to flake or to flow. So I put the cap on and put it away, and then used went to another area. I would judge 10, maybe 15 feet away, and encountered about the same difficulty in driving it in. Imagine it went in about the same depth. It strikes me that when I was removing this cord tube from the extension handle that as it was coming off, I had less confidence in initially putting the two together that they were going to stay together properly. And when I was removing it, it appeared as though the end of the core tube that attaches to the extension handle had a tendency to come off. I had noted this earlier in some of the bench checks, that when you screwed the core tube in or engaged it, that if you weren't careful when you disengaged it, that you were liable to disengage the cap on the other end. And the reason I'm belaboring this particular point is because I understand that one of the ends did come off. And I guess I can't be sure that it did not come off at the time of disengaging it. It could have come off in the box, but I don't believe they found the other end. So the assumption is that when it was taken off the extension handle, it took the other end off with it. It doesn't appear as though the material spread around inside the box because they couldn't find any, so it must have adhered pretty well. Did we get photos of both those areas? I'm not sure that you were around for the first one.
I did not get stereo pairs. I got one photograph.
Of each one?
No, at the second one.
The second. Well, the first one, to a high degree of confidence, was right in the area of the solar wind. And the second one, if we've got a picture of it, we can establish pretty well its location. The solar wind disengaged from its staff quite easily. When it rolled up, it had a tendency to sneak off to the side and to crinkle in the edges, and I spent 20, 30 seconds unrolling it, trying to get it to go up a little smoother, and then remembering that they really didn't care the exact neatness of it. All they wanted was the material back because they were going to cut it up in many pieces anyway. I bunched it together and it slid into its container fairly easily and got packed away. We were in supposedly a nondescript area, but there was far more to investigate than we could even come close to even scratching the surface.
I'll be interested in getting a lot of these pictures back and looking. I think you'll find that even though it's not a terribly rough area, it's basically a smooth area. Still, in all, operating around in any kind of a vehicle, any kind of a rover is going to take some planning and so on, because it's fairly steep slopes and deep holes and ridges and so on. I'm sure that you can devise things that'll do that, but it isn't going to be any old kind of a vehicle that'll cover that kind of ground.
It'll be very interesting to see just how soon you depart from the walking return concept. I don't think you can stretch that too far. I don't know how to hazard a guess as to what that distance is that you could say in some reasonable time you could return on foot. But it isn't miles, I wouldn't say. Oh, and you talk about miles, you're talking about out of sight of the limb, I'm afraid.
And one other area that's not listed here is the stereo camera. I'm going to make a couple comments about that. It worked fine, had no problems with it. However, it was hard to operate. I found that the angle that I had to put my hand on the handle to pull it, and the force that it took was excessive.
The squeezing of the trigger.
Yeah, and I found my hand getting tired pretty soon taking pictures with that thing. It was wearing out my grip.
Would you say that the angle was too horizontal?
Yeah.
You'd like to have had it slope down more
Right.
toward you.
Yeah, it was requiring the wrist to be cocked
Down too much.
down.
Yeah. The initial opening up or deploying of it went quite smoothly. The extension of the handle and the opening up of the case. I thought that that was quite well engineered. And in separating the cover, taking it off, cutting the film, and removing the cassette, that also went quite smoothly. So I think the big area for re-engineering might be just a change in the slope of the way the handle comes out. We might have to add a hinge or something like that to it. How about the height of the handle? I would think that'd probably be not too bad.
Probably was reasonable. The other problem he had with the camera was it was falling over all the time. And again, I think this is a result of a little bit of difficulty in figuring out where the local vertical is.
Yeah.
You'd set it down and think it was level, and apparently it wasn't, because next time you looked it would be laying over on its side, or you would bump it inadvertently while you were looking somewhere else and knock it over. And I picked it up 3 different times off the surface, and it's a major effort, of course, to get down to the surface to pick the thing up. So
how'd you do that, by going down on a knee?
On one occasion I got it with the knee, one occasion I got it with the tongs, and one occasion I had something else in my hand like the scoop or something that I could lean on to go down and get it. But it seems to me that in general there were a lot of times that I wanted to get down closer to the surface for one reason or another. Get my hand down to the surface to pick up something. And this was one thing that restricted us more than we'd like. For one reason, we really didn't have complete clearance to go put our knees on the surface anytime we wanted. We thought the suit was qualified to do that in emergency, but it wasn't planned as a normal operation, so we didn't let ourselves settle to our knees a lot of times so we could get our hand on the surface. Now, I think that's one thing that should be done more on future flights. That is,
I think
we should clear that suit so that you can go down to your knees, and we should work more on being able to do things on the surface with your hands. So that's going to allow you to be a lot more productive with your time and be less concerned about your planning and little inadvertent things that happen.
I think we can say we have the confidence now to know that you could get back up from the surface. You might have to put your hand right down into all this. The thing that discouraged me was the powdery nature of the surface and the way that it just adheres to everything. I didn't see any real need in getting down. I had no concern about doing it. But I agree. I think if it requires something on the suit to qualify it to do that, then we ought to go ahead and do that. If it doesn't, if it just requires looking at the suits that we brought back and then saying that they're qualified to go down on your knees, we ought to do that.
If you have a grip on something like a scoop or a stick to hold on, why then there's no problem getting back up at all. You can go right down and just push on your hand and push yourself right back up. It's very easy as the time I did it with the scoop in my hand. And it's just that was one thing that we hadn't done a lot in our simulations, and it would be a help, I think. SRCs, they worked as planned. The only difficulty that I encountered was closing the boxes.
Well, opening the second one, I felt required a little bit more force than I had anticipated. Just lifting up the lever lock.
The closing the bulk sample box took a lot more strength than I expected, and I was just everything I could do to close the documented sample box, and it felt like I might have left the seal in there. I was afraid I might have left the seal in the box. I don't think I did, because at the time I thought I remembered clearly taking the seal off and throwing it away, but that's what it felt like. I had closed one, or tried to close one with the seal in place one time during training inadvertently, and this was very much the same kind of a situation. Took just an inordinate amount of force. There's another difficulty in the fact that the gravity is so low that the box tends to slip around very easily. It feels very light and skitter away from you. So you have to, in addition to closing it, you have to hold it firmly down against the table. And the table's not very rigid. It's quite flexible. So just holding the box well enough into position to close the high force on the sealing handles was some trouble.
Well, they didn't leak at all.
Did they have a good? Oh, that's good.
Subjectively comparing the handling, the weight of those boxes when we got them out of the spacecraft on the carrier, and John handed them to me and I put them down. If I were asked to compare the difference in gravity fields, I would have come up with something closer to 1/10 in just judging the difference in weight and feel of things and the way that the masses behaved. 1 to 6, it gives you the impression that there's much greater difference than that in the behavior of objects. Now, in your own maneuvering around, it doesn't seem to be anything like a factor of 6 difference in your ease of being able to do things. It would appear as though the gravity difference were much less. I guess what I'm saying is that it looks like the human can adapt himself to this quite easily, and it also appears as though in handling objects it's considerably easier in 1/6G even than we had anticipated in maneuvering them around. They do have a certain mass, and when they get going in a direction, they'll keep going that way, as was evidence, I think, when they were coming in the hatch on the LEC. Fairly easy to manage, but you have to take your time in handling it.
Okay, I'd like to skip ahead here a minute to the LEC before we start ingress. The LEC worked as expected. However, there are a couple comments that are worth noting. Primary one is that it was a great attractor of lunar dust, and was really impossible to operate the LEC without getting it on the ground some of the time. And of course, whenever it touched the surface, it picked up a lot of the surface powder, and as the LEC was operated, that powder was carried
right back up in the cabin,
up into the cabin, and carried, and then had to go through the pulley, of course, which would shake it off, and the part that was coming down was raining powder on top of me and the Mesa and the SRCs, such that we all looked like chimney sweeps, just covered with this powder, which is a result of, primarily as a result of stuff being thrown out by the LEC. Also, this tended to bind in the pulley, apparently. I felt like there was enough of the silt collecting in the pulley that it was actually binding. Now, fortunately, Buzz was able to help a great deal, and he actually put the majority of the forces into pulling the boxes up from the top end rather than me from the bottom end. I found that the angle that I had to lean over, very severe angle, did not enable me to put in as high a forces as I'd planned in pulling. The ground was too soft, and my feet would slip too easily by pulling on the cable, and I was leaning over at probably a 45-degree angle sideways, so that with one foot behind me, so that if my foot slipped, I wouldn't fall down. But well, the surface was worse. I think the angle and so on was about the same, but I didn't have the footing. Couldn't get the footing in this soft powder that you needed to do that job.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of points that could be brought out here that tend to make that sort of a thing more difficult. One is that this powdery graphite-like substance, when it comes in contact with a rock, makes it quite slippery, just like graphite is slippery. I commented on this on a fairly smooth sloped rock, that it was quite easy to get this material on it, and the boot would slip fairly easily. So that fact tends to make you more unstable. The second one is that the surface may look the same, but we found in many areas with just very small changes in the local surface topography that there would be unexpected differences in the consistency and the softness of this top layer. For example, you might find that in some areas where there was just a small little slope, that when you were on the edge of this slope, that there would be little change in the thickness or depth at which you penetrated. In other places, you'd find you put your foot down and you would tend to slump the surface down to a new location, as if there were a different depth of the more resistive subsurface. And these two promoted to give you not too high a confidence level in your ability to be off balance or have peculiar footing setups. On the operation of the LEC inside, in order to keep it coming smoothly and to have my pulling on it directed in the appropriate direction, so that it neither tangled up near the pulley end or tended to move it or slide it as it went out the hatch, I found that I was completely unable to look out the window at the same time. So it was a question of mine just looking at the LEC itself and talking to Neil and hoping that we were coordinated and trying to do the same thing. It would be very nice to maybe work this over a good bit more and see if there is some way to maintain visual contact back and forth, but I didn't find that it was very easy to do. The first step up to the bottom rung, no doubt, it's a pretty good step, though Neil tells me he got up to the third step, which indicates, anyway to me, that the capability must exist to do a good bit more in terms of a vertical jump than certainly the pogo leads you to believe you can do. There's no way to evaluate that in the airplane. The big problem in the pogo was it just didn't seem as though you could bring enough to bear, and that it would carry, that your inertia would carry as far as evidently it's able to do with a good leg extension.
The technique I used was one in where I did a deep knee bend in both legs. I got my torso down absolutely as close to the foot pad as I could with the deep knee bend, and then sprang vertically up and guided myself on the exterior of the handrails with my hands. And I got to the third step, which I guess was of the nature of between 5 and 6 feet above the ground, easily. No, things happened very slow up at the top of the horizon. I could look down there and look where my feet were and just stuck one on the proper rung.
I wouldn't say that the rungs of the ladder were in any way dangerously slippery, but with the material on the bottom of your feet, they did tend to slide back and forth over there.
A little slippery.
And I think we've already mentioned the adequacy of the platform for other operations, alternate ways of bringing things up. The hatch moved inward very easily, and I moved the camera from its position on the right side of the floor as I faced the hatch up onto the Z-27 bulkhead. Had very little difficulty, again using the same technique as you're about halfway in of making a concerted effort to arch your back to keep the bliss down and keep your belly down up against the floor, thereby affording you the least profile going in. There didn't seem to be any exertion at all associated with raising yourself up and transitioning to a point where you then bring your knees on inside the cockpit and then moving from there to a kneeling and then to an upright position. It all seemed to work quite smoothly. There is a large bulk behind you, and you have to be careful when once you get in, before you start to turn around, that you make adequate allowance for all this material behind you.
PSI now. Please show the cabin at 4.8 now.